We'll be calling the meeting to order shortly. So we'll call the meeting to order. So there's just a few items of interest, of course. It's February's Black History Month, so we just wanted to wish the London community a very happy Black History Month. Tomorrow, the LPS will be hosting Louis Corey Trailblazer Award, and I wanted to turn over to Chief Perry to kind of give us a little background, and I think we have a special guest as well.
Yeah, so as part of Black History Month, the London Police Service for many years has held an event at the London Police Headquarters in recognition of Sergeant retired Louis Corey, who was the first Black police officer with the London Police Service. And just part of that is to recognize his distinguished career, but also to recognize a young person in our community that values and attitude represents what Louis Corey brought to the community. And we always have a guest speaker, and tomorrow night's guest speaker is Justice Tulloch, Michael Tulloch, which many of you will be aware of, that has done quite a few reviews, oversight of policing, and the most recent one on the collection of identifying information. And so I've got to speak with Justice Tulloch a number of times, and I felt bold enough to give him a call and invite him to be our keynote speaker, and he graciously accepted that offer, and so he'll be here tomorrow night to express some words of wisdom, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Chief. So, London community, feel free to attend. It's open to the public. It's at London Police Headquarters, and I know Javid will be representing the board as well, and there'll also be other board members as well in attendance. I wanted to also thank Vice Chair Susan Topp, who's not here with us today, for participating in the fundraising for the Polar Plunge for the Special Olympics Torch Run, along with Chief Perry, Deputy Chief Williams, and Longworth, Dave Gilmore, the LPA president, and other LPS and community members. It was great pictures. That was a great front page picture of our chief. I think too bad we can't put him up on the big screen. But again, kudos to everyone, and thank you for your ongoing efforts. So we'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we'll get right up in the meeting. So look for any new business items. I know we have a letter to the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Service, so look for a motion to add that to the agenda. Moved by Javid, seconded by Helmer. And also in that motion, we'll also be adding the long-term care and Ontario Association of Police Service Board related to emergency room handover. So we'll add that to the motion as well for those two added items. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And it carries. Any other new business, board members? Seeing none, we'll get into the meeting. So look for a motion to approve the minutes from January 17th. Moved by Helmer, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? Carries. Human Resources Report, Deputy Chief Longworth. Oh, sorry. Any comments from the board? Another great report. Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Chief Longworth again on the use of force. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Just look for a motion to receive that report. Moved by Javid, seconded by Helmer. All those in favor? Carries. So we'll go to the use of force mandatory report, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Longworth for some comments.
Sure, I can just make some brief comments. As you know, the Police Services Act requires that police officers have to submit a use of force report anytime they draw their firearm, point their firearm, discharge their firearm, or use a weapon on a person, or use physical force that results in an injury that requires medical attention. The actual use of force reports capture a great deal of data about the use of force interaction that assists us in and informs us in the development of our training. The actual use of force, the attached report highlights some of that data and the trends contained in those individual reports. In 2018, just as a highlight, there were 287 use of force reports submitted by members, which represents an 11% increase over 2017. Now, just to put that in perspective, you have to consider that our officers attended 138,878 calls for service last year. And that does not to mention the hundreds of thousands of other interactions they have with the public through traffic stops or meetings on the street. The training unit continues to incorporate principles of de-escalation into all aspects of the training we do in our officers. So subject to any questions, the majority of the information is contained in the report that you can review.
Thank you very much. Look to the board for any questions. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Thank you. So a couple of questions about some of the trends that might be there in terms of the 5-year period we're looking at. When it comes to the conducted energy weapons, it seems like it's moving upwards. Do we think that that is going to continue, or do we think that's reaching a sort of stable point? And in those situations where the conducted energy weapons are being used, part of the difficulty in the report is understanding, of these things that were ineffective, when we're using the conducted energy weapons, is that actually resulting in ending the situation and getting the subject under control? Is it leading to injuries? Like, how is it going, I guess, with the conducted energy weapons when they're being used?
So yes, the use of conducted energy weapons has increased. I believe it's 110 times this year versus in 2018 versus 102 in 2017. But also there's a decrease in the other intermediate use of force options like the baton, like the OC that corresponds with that use. But also probably more significant is there's a significant decrease in the use of hard physical control of members. And I think that the use of the conducted energy weapon likely will increase because every year we're learning that it's becoming a more and more effective tool on the street, and it does lead to less injury. If you'll notice, of those incidents that the CEW was used, 75% of those, it was simply displayed, and that gained compliance right away. I think the word is getting around on the street that it's out there, it's effective. So when they see it come out, I think the compliance is quick to happen, and it allows our officer to engage the person and gain compliance from a distance, as opposed to moving in and getting hands-on. And that's when either the subject gets injured, or a lot of times our officers get injured. When I dug into the injury reports, our officers were injured 74 times last year. 38 of which required medical attention. So the CEW allows us to gain compliance and do our jobs as effective as we can, and while trying to do our best to mitigate or diminish the opportunities for injuries, both for the public and for our officers.
Thank you, and perhaps a suggestion for next year, because I know in the text of the report, it talks about, 75% it's just being displayed, right? And then you gain the compliance. And I think without the context of that, if you're just reading the table, it seems like it's being deployed, like you're actually firing the weapon, right? And that doesn't seem like that's actually what's happening in the case. So 110 times it was used, but of those 75 or 77 or something did just display it. So I think that if you could break that out, it might be helpful in terms of people understanding what is going on. I'm not sure. And then in terms of the weapons being carried by subjects, there's some changes there that are year over year type changes. Could you give me a sense of the overall magnitude? Because we're looking at percentages there, that could be very concerning. You see more people who are carrying weapons like pistols and handguns and shotguns increasing, but how many times is it actually happening in sort of raw numbers?
That raw number, I believe, equates to 43 incidents this year where our officers encountered a subject or was perceived to be carrying a firearm, over 21 the previous year. So even though it's a 7% increase, the volume of the overall incidents increase in that volume equates to 22 incidents increase over last year. And if I can comment too, when you're talking about breaking down the CEW usage, that information is contained in the body of the report, but are you suggesting we put it on the chart so it's easily recognizable? Okay, that's easily done.
And last, just some comments. I think it's really good that we review these reports. These situations where force is being used can be very dangerous situations for both officers and for the subjects. And I'm glad to see that, first of all, there's no major injuries right? Of all these times where force has been used, we have 40 minor injuries, which is concerning, obviously, but the fact that they're minor and not more significant, I think is a really good thing. Also that the number of times people are pulling firearms and deploying firearms, when you take out the parts that are animals, right? This time we had, it looks like one time a weapon was discharged. It wasn't related to euthanizing an animal. Last year, I think it was 0. And so I think that's really testament to the quality of the officers and what they're doing when they're engaging in very dangerous situations, that they're not having to fire their firearms and that they're able to do their jobs without putting people at risk of serious harm, themselves or other people. And I think people get the impression from watching TV and movies that people are always shooting guns at other people. And, you know, that just doesn't happen in the city of London, right? The kind of policing that's going on here, very rarely are any police officers ever shooting their guns at people. And when we're having to use force, we're doing it in the way you're supposed to, which is to escalate it slowly till you gain compliance. So it's not like you go immediately to the maximum level of force all the time. You know, that's just not happening. And I think it's really encouraging to see that. And I want to say kudos to the officers through administration for that work, because those are very dangerous situations and they are doing a good job.
I don't want the cough to get caught in the camera. So, and again, I want to reiterate, I know Councillor Helmer and the deputy highlighted the 74 times officers were injured, 38 times medical attention was needed. So I just wanted to, you know, take a moment to appreciate the officers who continue to put their lives on the risk and their bodies, you know, in harm's way. So thank you for that. And if you could relay that to those members, I know, you know, it's unfortunate reality that they face, but I think it's something that the board should recognize is unfortunate that continues to happen. I did have a question around the 43 incidents where it was perceived to carry firearms. Last year it was 22. Do we know if I know we usually tend to look at it from a 5-year kind of outlook. Is there anything associated that you can connect that with? Was there any increased projects that maybe led to more, I guess, arrests that maybe we found people with firearms at the time? I'm just trying to, and I know it's hard to answer because again, we usually look over a 5-year period, but just wanted to see if you had any preliminary points or any concerns to raise to the board.
Because the data is drawn from the actual use of force report provided by the province, we don't have that information, the ability to break it down. However, I have asked them to break down certain things I'd like to know more about, in addition to what's contained in the use of force report, which they're going to try and track down. For instance, how many of those incidents involved replica firearms or actual firearms, which I think is important to know. But I can comment outside of the use of force data that we draw from, that last year specifically, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but so we've got one indication from the use of force reports that our officers encountering firearms is rising. But if we also look at the data, the number of firearms we seized on the street last year, it's increased by 95. 214 firearms seized in 2018 versus 119 the year before, which is consistent to the year before that, which was at 120. So we're starting to see a trend. Again, I never want to rely on 1 year of data, but now we've got 2 indicators of more weapons out there on the street. And now if we compare the use of the officers injured that I just spoke about, 74 in 2018, the previous year when I reported on this last year and we dug into it, I talked about 50 officers being hurt, 35 of which did not require medical attention, and 15 which did require medical attention. So now we got 3 indicators, more officers being injured, we're seizing more weapons on the street, and of the use of force encounters our officers are encountering, we're seeing more subjects armed with weapons. So again, not to be alarmist, one year data, but we got 3 different things that are kind of pointing us in a direction that we may be heading.
And just as a follow-up to my question, I know I talked about the projects. Do we know if we've had any specific projects? I know the last meeting we talked about, you know, we had a list of kind of projects where maybe we've had more arrests and seizures, and I'm just wondering if we've had an increase in projects that were specific to guns and gangs, I guess, in particular, that might have brought up those numbers, because, well, you know, there's more of a dedicated effort on the front. I'm just wondering if there's anything on that side.
I just deferred to my colleague here, Deputy Williams, who looks after operations, but I think we're on the same page that we're consistently running gang projects. We're consistently doing drug investigations and targeting firearms offenses. So I don't think there's been any one thing we've done over the last year that would that would suggest that, that we've driven this number up by over-enforcement.
Thank you. Mayor?
Thanks very much. I'd like to thank you for the report. I found that as I reviewed this, that it's factual to the extent that it doesn't have opinion in it as much as it has details and statistics year over year. I find that interesting, and we can draw our own conclusions. You made reference to guns on the street and that apparent frequency, but in the areas of types of force as it relates to firearms, to effectiveness and injuries, those seem to be three particular large categories. Are there any areas in there that you would bring to our attention that would cause you concern?
No, the only trends that really we really focused on was the number of armed persons our officers were encountering when they're using force, the slight increase in the CEWs, but then also the corresponding decrease in the other intermediate type incidents. So there were no real other trends that were identified through that, or nothing to be concerned about, I don't think.
Thank you. And through your chair, in terms of injuries to officers, looks to be a slight increase, but to what extent does that impact concerns with regard to the force? Will that change any of the approach that you're taking with respect to dealing with individuals that you confront?
I think overall our training, as much training as we can supply, dealing with officer safety and being cognizant of your surroundings, waiting for backup, all those kind of things. It's part of our culture. It's part of what we're constantly driving. Every day our officers go out and put their lives on the line, as commented earlier, and I think it's something we always have to remind ourselves of. We can go through shifts and shifts and shifts and maybe even months and years without having a significant use of force interaction, but we always have to maintain that sense of awareness and that vigilance that our officers have to have. And that's introduced in our training. Our training is constantly trying to evolve and stay current by making it as realistic as possible. And when we come looking for more dollars for training or new technologies to assist us in those training simulation type things or training environments, it's something that we need to be cognizant of, that you can't put a cost on this when it comes down to, you know, officer safety and the potential to lose lives of our officers for the work that they do.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, look for a motion to receive the report. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by the Mayor. All those in favor? And it carries. Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Williams, 2018 Crime Call Public Disorder Analysis Report.
So in accordance with the provincial adequacy standards, each police service is required to have a crime analysis function, and we're very fortunate, excuse me, to have 4 dedicated crime analysts who, one is a sworn supervisor, the other 3 are civilians. They used to be sworn, but we've civilianized them. And they're sort of the backbone of what we call intelligence-led policing. So they take all the data and intelligence and identify trends and problems that need to be addressed, and they feed it to the front line. So they're highly trained and highly specialized, and it's probably something we could do a presentation for the board on maybe within next year when an opportunity is available. It's quite an interesting area. So this report basically sets out how we are satisfying the requirements of adequacy.
Thank you, Deputy. I look to the board for any questions. Deputy Mayor Heller?
Just a brief comment. I think this report is helpful in understanding how the area is organized and sort of how they're approaching the analysis function. I do think a presentation would be really helpful to kind of bring to life some of the work in as much as you can do in a presentation. You know, maybe some old stuff that is not a current crime pattern or something that would be, you know, helpful, I think, for people to understand and to show how the response, like, you know, here's the pattern, here's the trend, here's how we responded, and you know, here's the results, because I think it's led to some really good outcomes in terms of problem-oriented policing and those kind of pieces. So I think this is a really important function. You know, I know it's a relatively small team, but they're doing a lot of great work, I think. I know I've come to the deputy chiefs with some issues in the area that I represent as a counselor. And, you know, having this information, this kind of analytical capacity available, it makes it very easy for someone who's not involved in policing to explain, you know, what is going on, and, you know, here's why it's important to report. You know, let us know what you're seeing and what kind of things are happening in the community, because without the information, it's very hard to do the analysis and deploy resources effectively. So I'm very interested in seeing the presentation. This report is helpful in terms of understanding the basics. It's good.
Javid?
Yeah, just in line with Deputy Mayor, I also found it very helpful. And I think that we're in an environment where there's lots of legislation and policy that's evolving. Some of our adequacy standards perhaps will also be evolving and rapidly changing. So it's not only useful to have these kinds of reports with the detail that's provided, and I support the idea of a presentation in the future, but I also think it's important for us to consider how we translate some of this language into terms that helps us engage with our public. So while we wouldn't expect necessarily everybody to be able to understand exactly what one division is versus the other, in line with the excellent strategic plan that we saw several months ago, what I'm curious about is how we can disseminate this and translate some of what is done, even the complex stuff, into concepts and terms that the general public can understand and resonate with.
Yeah, so a few different things there. One of the areas they're moving into is, you know, a break from traditionally what we've done is we've been able to produce maps with dots on them to show people what's already happened and tell our officers what trends have already occurred. So they're moving more towards predictive analysis. So we want to get the crime trend on the way up rather than after it's already occurred. So there's that, and as you know, when we do our public talks, we harp on to the public about the importance of reporting events, whether it's a theft from their vehicle or a break into their shed. If we don't know about it, then we can't investigate it, and we don't identify these trends. And one of the ways in which we're trying to get the information out is through our public website, which has a crime mapping tool on it. So the crime mapping tool has select events, different crime types attached to it. So the public can go on, it's very easy to use, and you can focus on your own neighborhood and determine what's happening in your neighborhood. And that's one way that we try to package the information so it's consumable for the public.
Seeing no other questions, Deputy Mayor Heller?
Just since the deputy chief raised it, I will say I get a weekly report on activity in my area. I have 197 of them now. They come in, you know, every week. They get an email and it gives me a rundown of what's going on. And it's really helpful, you know, so you can pick this kind of geography that you're interested in and just keep an eye on that one area. I gotta say, I'm not keeping an eye on the whole city. I'm just interested in one particular area, but people can probably guess which one it is. But it is really helpful. And I think you also have to be cautious though, when you look at it, to not read too much into some of those things, and be careful with what you're doing. And I think that's why it'd be helpful to have the analysts in to talk about the kind of work that they're doing, because you want to draw good conclusions from this information and not ones that kind of seem good on the surface and aren't actually that accurate. You know, things that are one-time blips and not a strong trend in one direction or the other. But the community crime map is a great tool.
Thank you. And from the chair, I have a question. I know I heard this very anecdotally, so I don't know if there's any truth to it, but related to the crime map, I know I've heard from people when they're renewing their insurances, whether it's home or vehicle, they've heard that insurance companies would say, we could tell that crime's up in specific areas, and one person has mentioned to me that they referenced the crime map from insurance companies. I'm assuming you probably don't know nothing about that, but I know I said I'd raise that when I had an opportunity for the member public, so maybe if you can comment on that.
I certainly can't speak on behalf of insurance companies, but I think they have different methods of determining risk and how they set their rates, if that's what you're getting at. But we don't share any information with them separately from the public. Whatever's on our website, everybody has access to.
Perfect. That's helpful. I just wanted to clarify that for the members of the public, so thank you for that. So seeing no further discussion on this item, look for a motion to receive. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. Thank you for the report. 2018 year-end Crime Stopper statistics. Look for any discussion from board members. Seeing none, look for a motion to receive. Moved by Javid, seconded by the mayor. All those in favor? And it carries. Annual report on the collection of identifying information in certain circumstances. Deputy Longworth.
Because we have some newer board members, and this is still relatively new legislation, which is somewhat complex even for us to interpret sometimes, I will take a little bit of time just to walk through a little bit of why this report is here and what it means. As you know, on January 1st, 2017, the Ontario regulation on collection of identifying information in certain circumstances was initiated under the Police Services Act. This regulation applies with respect to an attempt by a police officer to collect identifying information about an individual from the individual if that attempt is done for the purposes of inquiring into offenses that have been or might be committed, inquiring into suspicious activities, or gathering information for intelligence purposes. In 2018, the London Police Service attempted the collection of identifying information on 2 occasions. Of these attempts, both resulted in us collecting personal information. When identifying information is attempted or collected by a police officer, there's a strict process to determine if the information is compliant with the legislative requirements. If the interaction is determined to be non-compliant, the record is removed from searchable police databases and access is restricted. In 2018, of the 2 collections, upon review, 1 was deemed to be non-compliant. In the non-compliant collection, the officer did not notify the individual that he did not have to identify himself, and further did not supply a receipt, both of which are requirements under the Act. The non-compliant interaction was thoroughly reviewed. There was no misconduct identified, certainly just a matter of a training issue. The officer was spoken to and educated additionally on the requirements of the legislation. So as we continue to develop our abilities to work and better engage our diverse communities, we continue to run programs designed to allow our officers to develop a better understanding and appreciation of diverse communities and implicit biases. And in 2017 and 2018, we had community members that came in to speak to us specifically about perspectives and a focus on the Black community and the LGBTQ plus community and their relationships with police. And this type of training will continue in 2019 and moving forward.
Thank you very much. Javid?
Thank you so much for the context to the deputy. I think reading this report triggered a lot of reflections for me and things I think are important to highlight for the board and for our community. I am so proud of us in London when I see this because it reflects a real change in the way that I see the issue. I think having statistics like this are useful, and I again commend our service for responding to some of the ambiguity in legislation and policy in a way that really addresses the needs of our community. It's very encouraging for me to see such a low number, but what I want to share is that Community Relations Subcommittee of the board, we did discuss the issue of continuing to engage with our community around these issues so that the community members, such as the ones mentioned by the deputy, that are involved in the training and are engaged with the board and part of LPS's existing community engagement efforts, still continue to provide feedback to us as a board on the issue and ensure that what we see is these results also translates into their lived experience of change. Thus far, it's been very encouraging because that's what we're hearing from these communities. But as a board, I think we're going to continue to be committed to engaging, particularly with racialized communities in the City of London on an ongoing, regular basis so that they know that we're not going to just forget about the issue and continue to keep the conversation going. Thanks.
Looking for any other discussion? Look for a motion to receive the report. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? And it carries. Audit, London Police Service Board Special Funds. Any questions? Seeing none, look for a mover. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by the mayor. All those in favor? And it carries. Freedom of Information, FOI. Councillor Helmer?
I just wanted to comment briefly that only 5% of files being overdue. Pretty good record. I know that a lot of these requests can be fairly time consuming to keep up with across all kinds of different organizations. And I just wanted to comment on that because it's pretty great performance.
I think all the credit for that has to do with the people that oversee and work that area, because Deputy Williams just reminded me at one point it was as high as 30%. So they've done very well. We've done some restructuring to give them some additional bodies without impacting on the operational budget. And so that's helped, but certainly the organization and the structure and the workflow that they've managed to handle in there has become very, very efficient, I think.
Thank you, Chair. To the deputy, I noted that there are two components of this. One is the FOI request and the other that involves photographs. I noted that as I read the report that that when there are requests for photos that it's managed through the forensic identification section, but are there any times when, for example, with a gruesome picture or something that it's not provided? And separately, does it ever make sense to try to combine the two into one area in terms of providing that information? Just some background on that would be helpful to me for understanding.
So the first part of your question, the requests are usually they're vetted through the investigator and through the through our legal department as well to see what we should or should not release, what's relevant. Because there's a cost associated with it, the insurance companies don't necessarily want all the pictures. They want relevant pictures. They're going to assist them in their case. So hopefully that answers your first question. If you could just go over your second question again.
Yes, I guess the notion of combining the two so that when there are requests for information on FOI, that they be, as opposed to broken into two areas, that they just be basically organized through one. So right now you've got the requests that deal with factual information. The second part involves with photographs, and it's my sense that those are two different areas that deal with those requests. Is there ever a notion that those might merge?
Certainly something can be considered, but the reality, the logistics of it is the records are managed by the records department, and the photos are managed through our identification sections. They're the ones who take the pictures. They're the one who manage the pictures and then prepare it for evidentiary purposes. And it's the best, best structure at this point to manage both sides of those requests.
All right, well, thank you for that.
Great. Seeing no further discussion, look for a motion to receive. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hummer, seconded by Javid. All those in favor? Thank you. Please send our thanks to the FOI unit. Number 12, public reports and correspondence. Look for any discussion from the board. Seeing none, look for a motion. Moved for information purposes by Deputy Mayor Hummer, seconded by the Mayor. All those in favor? And carries. And number 13, Deputy Chief Steve Williams.
Just a couple of quick comments. I'm going to turn it over to Detective Dave Elliott in a minute. Detective Elliott is the supervisor of our human trafficking unit, which we formed in 2015. It's a dedicated group of 3 officers whose mission is to investigate those who traffic, abuse, exploit women, and those who purchase their services. Purchasing sex is illegal in Canada, and I don't think I'm exaggerating things to say that the abuse and exploitation of women and girls, some quite young, is pervasive in this city. And we're very proud of the work that Detective Elliott and his team do, and Mike Hay before him. So I'll turn it over to Dave, and I'm sure there'll be some questions after, so he's got a presentation.
Working. There we go, Mr. Chair, Mayor, Deputy Mayor. As the Deputy Chief said, I'm Dave Elliott. I'm going to run you through about 5 to 10 minutes presentation. It just gives you a broad overview of human trafficking. We'll talk about some of the investigative challenges that we're facing and some of the reasons that this is an issue in our city. As the Deputy said, 2017, Post-project Equinox, we formed a unit which currently has 1 detective, which is myself, and 2 detective constables. Currently, we have 2 additional detective constables seconded from another unit assisting just with our workload. I'm going to speak specifically about the 4 separate challenges that we're facing right now, just as an overview for you. So what human trafficking is, one of the things that we have to talk about is consent and control. We have to be mindful that people have a right to choose, but in my experience, the vast majority of women and girls that I've dealt with, if you get down to their actual story, have not chosen, and somewhere in their life have been exploited, which has led them into this particular problem they're in. The factors between voluntary and involuntary are the pieces that we're looking at. We're looking for those that are forced into prostitution through whatever means, and that they have no voluntary decision-making or control over what happens, what they do, what happens to their money, and what they're allowed to do. It's an ongoing issue in our city. Some of the confusion that there is whether or not human trafficking is actually human smuggling. It's not, it's different. Smuggling is where an individual pays a third-party group to move them, usually across a border. But what we're talking about is women and girls that are being exploited in our community. We also have issues in our community with involving labor trafficking, and we have several ongoing investigations with that as well. A Canadian perspective, human trafficking is an issue coast to coast to coast. 93% of our victims are not what the public perceives to be as international people coming here to be exploited. It's actually 93% of the victims are actually Canadian citizens. We know statistically 50% of the victims are Indigenous. That is not necessarily true of our city, but it's true of the coast-to-coast picture for Canada. The startling statistic of 75% of those in prostitution were forced into it as children, and reflects some of the things that we see in our city. These stats come from an all-party working group to end modern slavery, which is part of our federal government's group to end human trafficking in Canada. Indigenous community, we are involved with our Indigenous community to help address this. We recognize that we have a lot of work to do to build inroads into that community, and we continue to do so. Even right now, I have one of my detective constables in Toronto on an Indigenous human trafficking seminar, and the report back I had this morning was that the speakers were outstanding, and he has some takeaways to bring back to us. In order to address the Indigenous issues, we have to really look at the community, the root causes, the vulnerabilities. We got to build the trust, and we got to implement a greater partnership to deal with those issues. And we recognize that in our unit and look to partnerships in our community and through our neighbors just west of the city. So why is London a hub? This is a question I've asked myself for years. I know the chiefs asked as well. Part of it is we're the island sort of between major centers such as Detroit and Toronto. The 401 has a significant role as the route or conduit for traffickers to move around the women and girls that they're trafficking. The number of hotels in proximity to the 401 is an issue, as well as the hotels on the east side of the city. Some of the issues when we deal with hotels is the fact that they'll accept cash with ID rather than using credit cards and such. So the human traffickers can book their hotels online and then arrive and then pay cash, or a different person can take that. So there's issues that we're dealing with our hotel community to say, how can we work together better to address this issue? Demand is a huge piece here. We had it out in the media, but we ran a proactive project where we ran a fake ad to conduct a John sting operation. That ad was only placed on an online site, which I'll show you in a minute, but it had over 9,000 views within a week. And if you think about, there's 9,000 people looking at that fake ad, that speaks to the demand that's ongoing in our city by men to buy sexual services. And that's a problem that we really have to address. So one of the main advertising forms that are out there is this particular website. The website itself is a problem. It's globally, it's a global industry. When we look at the ads this morning, just I looked at it, there was 40 ads for the City of London on just this one website. Yesterday, there was over 70 ads. Currently, when I looked at it this morning, there's 38,000 viewers at that time just on this website looking at to purchase sexual services. So that speaks to the demand that's going on in our society, and this is a significant issue for us. The highest I've seen it, because I try to track the ads as best as I can when I'm working, was 114 ads in one day, which I think speaks to the issues that men are buying sex. It's out there. There's so many of them looking, which is why there's so many ads out there. Some of the lines of efforts that I'd like to convey to you that you may not be aware of is that we've been a proactive police service when we look to address human trafficking and prostitution in our community. Early on, we had a sergeant appointed to work specifically with persons at risk. Currently, that position is held by Sergeant Amy Birch, and it offers sort of out-of-the-box thinking to deal with both our local social services, with the street-level sex trade workers, with medical issues, whatever the issue is, addiction, and provide a conduit for sharing of information and to start building trust into that community. So we've been doing that for well over 10 years. We work proactively with the hotels. Some hotels, most of the hotels are very receptive to my unit. And those that aren't, there's reasons for that. But generally, most hotels are very receptive because they recognize the issue and they don't want this problem in their businesses. We continue to work and do projects to address issues and work with our neighborhood BIAs through the core unit to address street-level prostitution and these other issues. So we have several lines of effort that are ongoing all the time. We recognize that my unit and the core unit cannot resolve this issue by ourselves. That it takes groups such as LOC and ANOVA and others to help us with this. So we have reached out to several community partners and several have reached out to us. We have MOUs ongoing with Salvation Army, YOU, ANOVA, LOC, ALOSHA, and we look to partner with whoever can bring something to the table to help support the victims when they're identified or help the victims get out of this sex trade. We recognize that as police officers, often victims really don't want to talk to us because maybe they've had a difficult interaction with police in the past. So what we're looking for is our community partners to step in, bridge that gap sometimes, and feel so that the victim feels comfortable to speak with us about their story, and if they want it investigated, that we can do so. Some of the investigative challenges, as I already spoke to, a lot of people involved in this don't want to deal with us, the police. As a plainclothes unit that are out there doing things more and more, when we're dealing with victims in the hotels, they didn't even know we were out there doing proactive work. And often we get positive comments back to from the sex trade workers saying, I didn't know you're out there. I have your information. We also speak to them that if they don't feel comfortable talking to us as police officers, that we will extend and provide information to them of the resources that exist within our community as to who they can call to get help, to deal with whatever the issue that has led them into this lifestyle, or if they want our help, we're there right now. Some of the pressures we feel is that traumatic bond between the pimp who's selling the sexual service and the victim. It's often referred to similar to Stockholm Syndrome. And it's a very difficult thing for us to overcome in a short period of time. We have cross-jurisdictional issues because we know the traffickers move and move quickly. They're only here in our city for a few days and then they're off to the next. So information sharing amongst the organization is critical for us and sometimes problematic. Each human trafficking unit across our province works different shifts, but we share each other's phone numbers. We know we can talk to each other in the middle of the night if something's going on. When we do an investigation, we're looking at our investigation to be structured in such a way that it corroborates the victim's statement, so that we're not relying solely upon the victim's word, a sort of he said, she said. When we go to court, many of our cases end up in Superior Court. Often they're challenged, but we want to go with a case that's solid. We want the victim, our goal is really to have a victim who's willing, well-prepared, reliable, has the supports they need to go through the process. And we reach out to a variety of community partners to accomplish that. Oddly, most of our victims don't even see themselves as being sexually exploited at first. If we can get to them and bring some understanding, they come around. But really, they don't feel like they're a victim, when in fact, you know, the vast majority of these women are victims of exploitation. Ontario perspective for our victims, 93% across the board are female. 47% are between that ages of 18 to 24. And alarmingly, 25% of our victims are under 18. I can share with you anecdotally that we are currently dealing with several young women that are below that age right now, which is very, very concerning for me as a lead of this unit. We know that it's a ghost crime that goes underreported for all of these reasons that we understand. That our lesbian, gay, and bisexual community does not report as often as they should to us. And we also have some work to do on that and with that community, along with our Indigenous community, as we spoke to earlier. The reality is when we talk about forced labor or labor trafficking victims, we still don't have a clear picture of what they are, because it's such in the underground that we don't understand completely the full picture as to what's going on. Until an incident occurs or a report is made, then we can start the investigation and take it from there. I'm often asked, why does the victim stay? Why don't they leave? And the reality, it's fear. It's coercion, it's fear of what'll happen, fear of what will happen to their family. There's a lot of things, and victims will say all kinds of things that you'll say there's no way that is real. But the longer you're dealing with victims of human trafficking, you realize their story is true, believable, as far-fetched as it may sound. Often you're left thinking, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. Victims exhibit these characteristics similar to kidnapping or domestic violence. So they may sympathize with their pimp. So it does take a lot of building of trust in order to get the victim to trust us as a police officer in order to move forward with the case. If you think of a victim of human trafficking, pick any city in our country and put yourself out at a hotel near the 401 with no ID, no money. Maybe you don't even know where you are. Now what do? And that's the reality often with some of our victims as to why don't they leave. You're right back to like the basic needs of a human being is where the pimps take these young women and girls. So why don't they leave? It comes right back to that fear, and they don't know where they are, what to do, who to call next. And we're working with our community partners, with the hotels, with some other institutions to make sure that every woman and girl and man knows who they can call at any time should they find themselves in this circumstance. Profile of our traffickers, overwhelmingly male, 83%, 18 to 24 years for 41%. And this is for Ontario. And it's a variety of single actors, bad actors. There's multiple players. One pimp may have 2 or 3 people that are working as enforcers or drivers. We also see in our city organized crime groups, and not just from Toronto, because everyone thinks this is a Toronto issue. It's not. We have North Preston's finest who come from the East Coast, and they travel right through our city. We run and we see them periodically through our city. So it's not just a Toronto, Detroit problem. It's coast to coast. And we see groups from Quebec from all over the place. Some good news that's out there is the national hotline will go live next month. This, I hope, will be, an outstanding tool. I know we've signed up to, as an organization, to be part of this, as some of our local non-government organizations. They're going to provide 24/7 multilingual services. Their counselors on the phone will be trained. We've already received our first phone call from the hotline about a case that was in our city. Having talked to the executive director, I think this is going to be a fabulous piece, and we'll be working with them to get the information out there. And there'll be a media strategy and a campaign strategy from the hotline that will go out, I'm sure, in the near future. And we're glad to be a part of that. Some next steps for us. Talking with my detective superintendent, Bill Merrilees, we want to be a provincial leader in investigative techniques for human trafficking. We want to have and continue to do proactive operations. We'd like to host in the near future our community partners and provincial partners and our non-government organizations to look at victim advocacy and how we support our victims. We want to work with the hotel industry and have their voice at our table. And of course, our law enforcement partners across government and our neighboring services so that we make sure we have those bases covered. We continue to look at joint forces operations because of the problem being so transient across our jurisdictional lines. And we want to examine and look to how can we integrate our social services at the city and our NGOs to help provide victim support in real time. And with that, it's a difficult thing because when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you're dealing with a victim, many of these organizations aren't open. So these are some of the things we're looking at for next steps for London. Subject to any questions you have, that's my presentation. It's really quick and I covered a whole bunch of stuff here. I can't speak to specific cases, obviously, in the public forum, but I'm always available to the board should you have any questions offline later.
Thank you very much. It's Detective Dave Elliott now, correct? Thank you very much. And to you and your team, you guys are doing one of the most difficult jobs in the country to have to undertake, but it's very much appreciated. And hopefully this board and the service can continue to do what we can to serve you. So on behalf of the London Police Service Board, please tell those who serve with you, we're very thankful because we know it's not an easy job and this is a very challenging issue in our community. And it's disappointing to hear that this is pervasive, but hopefully we can do what we can to end it. And in the meanwhile, hopefully all the traffickers will continue to keep looking behind and watching for you folks. So I'll go over to the chief.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just, I'm not trying to minimize the trauma, the threats, the beatings that the victims undertake, but I just want to recognize Dave and his team. It's a difficult task investigating these offenses and what they see, and I know that it does wear on them after a while. And but you know, they carry out every day very diligently in their work with empathy and compassion, doing the best job they can. So I just wanted to commend them on their efforts on this very important area. As you heard today, and you've been hearing a lot lately, is the seriousness and the significant issue with human trafficking, in particular here in the city. And it's reaching the point that, you know, we do our best to help these victims, but we have to start to defect the demand. And you heard 9,000 views in 1 week on one particular ad. And we've made a decision to commence a practice on a go-forward basis that where we're legally able to do so, we will be releasing the names of those individuals that are charged with purchasing sex. And this is our way to affect the demand and enhance public safety for these victims of human trafficking. And so really this is just a warning to those that make better choices in life. This is not a choice that you should be doing in purchasing sex and putting these victims at the risk that they are facing. And we're trying to use all the tools that are available to us to combat human trafficking, and this is just another step in that direction. Of course, we have to make sure that we fall within when we are legally able to provide that, but we're going to be treating them just like we do with any other crime in terms of the release of the information, being mindful of not identifying the victim and where there might be a publication ban in place from the courts, or there might be an impact on the judicial process or an ongoing investigation, but that will be our practice on a go-forward basis.
Thank you very much, Chief. So, and the board echoes your comments with the men and women who serve in the trafficking unit. I'll look to the board. Board Member Javid.
So I want to thank you, Detective, for the presentation. I have a question for you, but I also just want to thank our chief with what he just shared. It is just incredible to see how responsive we are to what the community is saying and asks for. And I think that this decision is going to save a lot of vulnerable young women from being exploited. So thank you so much as a board member, as a member of our community for this decision. In terms of the presentation, there's still so much more I think we need to do as a community. And there's two questions I have for you. The first is, I noticed in your outreach and engagement efforts that the health sector really wasn't there. A lot of times there's clear evidence-based opportunities for intervention related to human trafficking in places like primary care clinics, walk-in clinics, as well as emergency rooms. So I wonder if that's something we could potentially enhance and bolster. And the second question just speaks to generally, what more can we do as a police services board to draw attention to this issue and to unite our community as a collective to address some of the ways to address this issue?
Thank you for your question. Through the chair, the health sector, absolutely, and I suppose that's a neglect on my part, but, you know, this was brought forward several weeks ago. We were speaking with some nurses at, from Emerge at another presentation, and we will look to work with our medical services and likely our medical officer of health, I think would probably be a good gateway to start as well within our community. As to how we can address this in the community, I mean, part of it is understanding for everyone that it's illegal in Canada to buy sex. And there is this perception that it's, you know, you can actually go out and do this. It's not. It's illegal. And the more we can get it out there in the news, I mean, human trafficking, on my last slide, I only have a few clips. I could put 20 more clips from media of human trafficking cases from our own city that are out there. So the media is playing a role. But much of it is we're just trying to get out there as much as we can, bring understanding to that this is a significant concern and problem for our city. You know, as a police service board, you know, through our chief, I mean, my staff we're working hard. We're 3 right now. You know, I struggle with the amount of burnout my officers have. They can only do so much overtime. So, you know, resourcing, and when we run projects internally, we look to those pieces. So as to, you know, how many people we get in the future, that's up to the chief and yourselves ultimately. But I mean, we're working through the cases we have now. We want to be more proactive. The cases we work they're extensive. The number of warrants on a single case you have to write are significant. And I know my team right now is in the office writing up several warrants for a case from just a couple months ago that we're still working on. So it just comes down to managing our resources effectively and continuing to get the word out there so our citizens understand you cannot purchase sex. It's illegal. And we're out there looking for you right now. And we're looking to save women that are being trafficked and exploited in our community.
Mayor?
Thanks very much. I'd like to echo Javid's comments and acknowledge the chief for his leadership and our London Police Services. That, by the way, Dave, that was an important report, as this is an important day for London. I think by virtue of this announcement, we were putting Johns on notice that you will be caught, you will be arrested, and you will be publicly identified. I think it's a critical step to reducing human trafficking in our community, and I think it's important that we send a message to Johns, not in London. And it's my hope that that message gets through across this province and across this country. So strong kudos to our police, and thank you on behalf of Londoners.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, and through the chair to the detective sergeant, just questions around successful prosecutions of the traffickers and sort of what, without getting into, you know, kind of operational details you might not want the traffickers to know, what has sort of proven to be successful as a way of getting these folks off the street to stop these behaviors? From the description that you gave, it sounds like it's quite a range of different people who are engaged, some in organized gangs, others not. But in terms of, sometimes you might have more success going after them for some other offenses that they're doing that are not these offenses directly. I just wonder if you could give us a sense of what has proven to be successful in terms of prosecutions.
I mean, success in the courtroom, like, to me, the moment we get the victim in our care and we get them support, that to me is success. That's the start. And ultimately our goal is to get these young women and girls away from their trafficker. And, you know, I can't really comment on the court cases as to how they go. That's up to the judiciary. We know that we're attacked for, when we do get a conviction, what they attack now is not necessarily the case, but then they go after the government's minimum sentencing rules right now. So, you know, recent case in the paper for that. But our piece is, you know, we need to make sure our investigations are thorough, comprehensive, victim-centric, that the victim's, you know, well supported through the whole process. That takes time. It takes a lot of effort. For my investigators, it takes a lot out of them, especially when you're dealing with young victims as young as 16, 15 years old. You know, they may have been trafficked since they were 14. There's a lot of trauma there. And the first person they actually find trust in is that officer that rescued them. So I know my officers take phone calls day and night, and it's everything from what a 16-year-old girl would ask their parent, because some of them come from broken homes. Some of them come from very good homes. So it's making sure that we're victim-centric in our investigations. We use the criminal code appropriately and thoroughly, and then the rest is left to our prosecution team, who are outstanding. We work hand in hand with our Crown attorneys to make sure we've covered everything off as best we can. But it just comes down to time. That's a precious piece. And while you're investigating and doing these things, more cases are coming in. So it's managing what we have to do now, closest to the, you know, to the canoe right now, and then trying to set time aside to continue our investigations. So we've been very successful recently in our courts because we build thorough cases. We have the full weight of our service behind us, right from the patrol officers to the major crime detectives, you know, or major case support. So when we need to do something, the pieces are there.
Thank you. In terms of the, as you mentioned, there's our main traffickers, and then there's different people doing different parts of the sort of criminal enterprise. The recruiting side, you know, from some of the stories that have come out in the media coverage, it seems like there's a lot of young people who are involved in the recruiting side, some of whom themselves may have been victims. And there's a lot of coercion going on between the main traffickers and the recruiters. So how do you navigate that sort of thing where you have someone who is potentially both a victim and an offender, and you're trying to get them to help an investigation or to bring down the sort of whole thing rather than just get one recruiter who you know is doing something that is obviously bad and should stop doing that, but in the grand scheme of things is being coerced by somebody else further up the chain?
I mean, the big thing is understanding. People understanding. I recently did a presentation at King's College with their social work school. And I just asked for a show of hands of how many in the audience have actually received social media text or messaging from someone inappropriate with an inappropriate comment that they thought might now in hindsight after our presentation think was a human trafficker. And I was not shocked to see that the vast majority of young women in that room raised their hand. So we know, you know, the human traffickers are smart. They are using social media. Some of them are very tech savvy. So how do we bring an understanding to the broader group of our citizens? We are in discussion with all 3 school boards to say, how can we bring this message early and appropriate to the students in our city? We're at the early stages of that, and they're very receptive from the educators in our city to say, because they recognize it too. Several schools have issues that they've already seen, human trafficking, or what would appear to be branding trafficking, targeting students in their schools. So how do we get the message out? Those are the questions we keep asking and brainstorming about to say, how do I keep doing investigations but still do that proactive piece? So we're looking at our crime prevention unit to assist with that, and they're fully on board and looking at things. So hopefully that answers your question. Like, there's just so many different in routes that the traffickers are using that, you know, we're trying to figure those out. And as we do, we talk about and brainstorm strategies to address those issues.
Just maybe one final question for now, and I appreciate you taking time away from the investigative work and the proactive work to come talk to us here today. In terms of the joint forces operations and collaborating with other police services, other jurisdictions, to what extent are you working with the RCMP, for example? Like the range of it is so broad that you'd have to cover a lot of ground in terms of intelligence sharing and working on investigations together. So could you give me a sense of how that kind of works a bit more specifically about the joint forces operations?
Well, I don't want to give away our secrets, obviously, but what I can assure you is that annually we conduct multi-jurisdictional joint forces operations. Those human trafficking units or those police services that have human trafficking units, we meet quarterly. We discuss things. We meet with other investigative bodies to discuss, obviously, cases, but strategies. Next week, I'm going to discuss another, proactive operation, just to brainstorm and share best practices and to see who we can work with. I can tell you overwhelmingly, every single police service I've spoken to or that are in the room, we all know we have to communicate. We share our information openly as best we can. We exchange numbers so you know who to call, and that's the middle of the night, and what number will actually be answered. But everyone is struggling with the same issues we are. But they look to us right now to the proactive work we're doing. We share our operational plans with other services so they see what we're doing. Several are trying to emulate some of the things we've done here proactively. So on that side of house, everybody's open. Nobody has ever closed the door. Whenever we put it out there, we're doing a joint forces operation. I've had to turn services away because your scope gets too big, and we want to concentrate in our community. And we just encourage them to go, we'll call the next service next to you and go, why don't you do something at the same time, and then we'll just connect it where the dots connect. So across the province, we're struggling, but we're all engaged on the same problem. We're communicating effectively, and we're starting to see some positive results.
Thanks very much. Perhaps through to you, Detective, and that is this. We know that sexual predators, pimps, johns, use social media to advance their efforts. Is there a plan for London Police Service to use social media in turn to, I'm not sure if the word's warn, but to get the word out that, frankly, we intend not only to catch you and arrest you, but to make that arrest very public? Or would it be a more reactive thing, and then obviously what would happen then is the message would then ultimately get out? Is there a strategy around the media component of this? I'd be curious if you're able to share that.
What I can speak to is, yes, like in all of our proactive operations, we'll discuss, what is the media, like how do we reach our citizens? What media piece can we do with that, and have a strategy to say, can we get it out there? Depending on the type of proactive operation, whether it's after the investigation or before. But there is a media strategy to put this out there and address it. I work closely with my media officers to say, what messaging are we putting out there? We're constantly tweeting, using other avenues of social media to talk about human trafficking as part of the corporate communication plan. It's a vital part of our modern police service to communicate with our citizens, and we're fully engaged on that when we can and where we can.
And just to add to that, because of the change in our practice, and it, when you think about when we do a media release in relation to someone that is charged, we do the, the blast out to the media, we do the social media, we post it on our website, we use Facebook. And part of today, I think timing's everything. This decision was made a couple of weeks ago, but we decided to wait till today because of the presentation. And part of the rationale around that is this proactive piece and this warning to the public around this, the naming those that are charged with purchasing sex. So it is, it will be, and we're not going to hide behind the fact that we're doing this. But when it comes to the investigation, sometimes you have to protect the integrity of those investigations, and you can't give too much of a warning around those types of things. But
Thank you. And I guess I'm the last speaker on here. I just have a quick question. And I know I'm very big on tourism, and I love when we have events in our cities, but and I think it's important for me because I push for so much tourism in our city to recognize that sometimes when major events do come to cities in general, and I won't speak specifically about our city, but when big events come, whether it's, for example, the Olympics, that means there's more demand, and traffickers are coming in temporarily in the cities, from my understanding, what I've been hearing and reading. And I just wonder whether it's yourself or Deputy Williams or the chief, I guess, will we, is there a communication with the city? Because I know, or tourism, for example, when we're going ahead and making bids or having these conversations to host events and pieces like that, that we say, hey, there might be an impact to resources because we might need more resources in this specific area because there's going to be 100,000 more people come into town and there might be more needs for this. So maybe I'll look to the deputy or the chief or yourself, detectives, to maybe help with that question. Might be hard to answer, but.
So I have to be careful not to get into operational details, but there are large events that occur in London from time to time, and we know from experience that when these touristy type events bring people into the city that business increases, and we're prepared for that. Like Detective Elliott said, we don't message that out the eve of because we may have an operation ongoing. There is something, I know Megan from Locke is here, the signs. Okay, so there may be more coming on that soon, but yeah, I can't speak to operational details, but the point is well taken about large events.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And maybe I'll just turn over to you if you had any last comments you wanted to share. I know we don't want to keep you here any longer. You got a lot of great work to do. And again, thank you on behalf of the London Police Service Board, and we'll communicate that. And I also want you to know, many members of the council, so a couple were in watching this presentation as well as following it via live stream because this is an important issue to City Council as well. So thank you again very much. And I also want to recognize that I know it was mentioned by yourself, but there was many community partners that you continue to work with. And I know today we recognize London Views Women's Center is here today. Probably not just on this topic, but we'll find out soon enough. And again, Megan's here. So thank you very much. So look for a motion moved by the mayor to receive the presentation, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. All those in favor? And it carries unanimously. So the new business item, which is the two pieces. The first one is the letter to the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Service. Look for a motion and any discussion on that. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by the mayor. And Javid?
As the board is aware, this is just a follow-up to a discussion at our last meeting. We're moving forward, supporting our chief in his advocacy efforts provincially to address issues related to emergency room handovers and directing that input to the ministries involved.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further discussion, we'll call the question. All those in favor? And it carries. The next item we have is the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care and Ontario Association of Police Services Boards related to emergency room handover protocol. Javid? So moved by Javid, seconded by the mayor. Any discussion? All those in favor? And it carries. So we'll adjourn this meeting and then go to the members of the public, as we know we have some speakers lined up today. So look for a motion to adjourn this meeting. Of course, the next meeting will be March 21st. So moved by Javid, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. All those in favor? And it carries. And we're going to go to the members of the public. Any member of the public has the opportunity to speak to the London Police Services Board. They have 5 minutes. I know we have Megan Walker from London Abuse Women's Center here. Did you want to go first? Or, yep, it's up to you, or I could check if there's anyone else. All right.
So nice to see you, Father Jim. I've seen him forever. Your prayers are really helping. So I'm Megan Walker from the London Abuse Women's Center, and I do want to express the agency's gratitude to John and his team, but I'm going to do that towards the end. I want to acknowledge my 2 staff members that are with me today, Wendy Goldsmith, who is our trafficking and prostitution expert, and has been involved in doing a number of speaks and will continue to do that, and gives advice to our team around significant and serious issues. And Sandra Lynn Coulter, who is our director of programming. I do want to just briefly talk about the legislation. Mayor Holder has left, but he was also instrumental in passing this legislation when he was a member of Parliament. The legislation is the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act, and it identifies that prostitution is inherently violent and is a women's issue because it disproportionately impacts women and girls, and it also normalizes the sexual exploitation of women and girls. The legislation is based on the premise of supply and demand, and anybody who's ever taken an economics course or watched a television program talking about economics or business understands supply and demand. If there is an increased supply, there's an increased demand. If there's a decreased supply, there's a decreased demand. And the legislation focuses on ending the demand, ending those who are purchasing sexual services. It does not criminalize women. Oh, I was just speaking about you. Wanted to say thank you very much for your help when you were a member of Parliament in passing the legislation. You know how difficult that was from the struggles and the debates, and we appreciated your support, so thank you. So I'm just talking about supply and demand and how critical it is to end demand if we're going to decrease supply. And so the legislation focuses on criminalizing sex purchasers, because the legislation doesn't say we're only going to go after sex purchasers who are interested in trafficking, trafficked women. We're only going to go after sex purchasers that are interested in underage girls. We're only going to go after traffickers that are interested in women who say that they're not there by choice. The legislation is very clear that all sex purchasers, every man who makes a decision to buy sexual services from a woman or girl, is doing something illegal. And there are a lot of people that don't understand that. We are not in this legislation criminalizing those women who are in the trade. We are criminalizing those men who are actively choosing. Detective Elliott, his presentation was really great, and I appreciated what he said about the burnout of his team. This is the most difficult work on a number of fronts. It's very difficult to want so badly in your heart to help a woman who you know you can't help because she won't give up her pimp, or she has no other options, so she has to stay where she is. That is very difficult. It's very difficult to listen to the stories these women share, these stories of sexual assault and violence and torture that they endure. And in fact, because our agency has done so much work around torture, in human trafficking. We have been invited to the United Nations to sit on 2 panels to speak about that issue. And I think that's important because I will be bringing up at that point in New York the work of London Police Services and our partnership with London Police Services and how they have made it possible for women to seek help by developing relationships. You asked about social media and reaching out, and the London Abused Women's Centre just announced recently that in partnership with Youth Opportunities Unlimited and the Salvation Army, we did receive over $100,000 to do a targeted digital marketing campaign. We are targeting women and girls who are in the sex trade, letting them know help is available in any city. We're targeting actually every city between Windsor and Toronto, but that Hope and Help is available and they just need to click on the number and call and get help. We're also targeting men who think it's okay to purchase sexual services, to let them know it's illegal. And if they get caught, they could lose their jobs, they could lose their families, and they could lose their status in society. So that is actively going on. We did that same campaign last year, but just specific to London, Ontario, and received almost 1 million impressions. So it was pretty successful. Steve spoke about the signs, and one of the things I think is extremely important would be for the mayor to call together a human trafficking prostitution action committee, because we need to take action. We are losing girls in this community from Western, from Fanshawe, from secondary schools, and from some public schools. We've had girls recruited from their places of employment and at bars in downtown London. This is a huge issue, and it needs to be addressed with concrete action. One of our action steps, in addition to the others I mentioned, was around putting up signs off every exit of the 401 into London and also on the entries back onto the 401, simply indicating that sex purchasing is illegal in Canada. And we had the signs ready and everything was ready to go, and we were advised accidentally that we just needed an amendment from council to allow that to move forward. We've since been advised that it's not, the city will not allow us to put those signs up. And we think it's extremely important because many sex purchasers and many traffickers are utilizing those exit and entry ramps. And we are willing to pay for those signs. We have a fund to pay for those signs. I think they would be extremely effective. And I think the police would agree with that based on conversations I've had previously. And we need some help in making that happen. And I think having a trafficking action committee would allow that to push the agenda forward a little bit more. Jesse, you talked about those who are young girls who are actively recruiting in the game of prostitution and trafficking. They're called the bottom bitch. And they are actively entering into public schools and high schools. They're going into youth detention centers. They're going into group homes. And they are recruiting on behalf of their trafficker, these young girls. And it's a great tactic for the trafficker because he can't be caught. She will be caught and she will be arrested. And you will see in Canada many cases of women, young women, arrested for trafficking and for recruitment. And we know there's a relationship between them and a pimp. However, the activity is illegal. And we know that some of those girls go to jail and they will not give up the name of their pimp, even when told they can be released early by doing so. They will not do it. There is such a fear. So these are really big problems for us, and this is a really big issue. And I really want to highlight that men who purchase sexual services do not care if these women are trafficked. And they do not care if these girls are underage. In fact, they will pay more for an underage girl. And just to sort of highlight how prevalent that is, over 9 days in the summer of 2018, a sting operation in Vancouver arrested 47 men seeking teenage girls online for sex. Among them were a teacher, firefighter, and school trustee. In Ontario, provincial police laid 100 charges, child exploitation charges against 122 people in November alone. They included members of the military, engineers, emergency personnel, and former and current teachers. These are people that have access to our children, and they think it's okay to go on an ad that advertises for children to have sex with children, where they can do whatever they like to those children. They think that's okay. And then they go back into our schools and work with our children. This is a crisis. I could go on and on. You know, in Edmonton, they have a 17-person unit responsible for child exploitation, and 6 frontline officers conducted more than 600 investigations into child exploitation last year. So the biggest tool police officers have in cracking down on sex trafficking is the sex purchasing offense. It is much easier to lay that charge than it is to get a young girl or young woman to give up the name of her pimp. And the more men that are charged with sex purchasing and the more times their names are released to the public, the greater it is for us in reducing supply. And London, Ontario is a hotbed of sex trafficking. And you will know young women in your life and young girls that are likely being trafficked, and you won't know it to see it. That's how good these pimps are. So I do want to just speak to John for a minute, and then to Steve and Daryl. So I have worked with police services in this community since 1992. I was 4 years old when I started. And I've worked with so many police chiefs and so many officers. And I have never had the privilege of working with anybody who is as strong a leader, who has as open mind, who is as open-minded, and who is willing to meet, send emails, and telephone. It has been a privilege, John. And I know that there are many times I've been hard on you. And, you know, and that's kind of okay. It's okay that we're hard on each other, because I think sometimes it pushes us to go further. But I have enormous respect for you. And this is likely the last meeting that I'll ever attend with you. See, I'm a little emotional. But I want you to know how much your work has meant to us at the agency. And I want to talk for a minute about Daryl and Steve, because these two men have been mentored by the best. They know how to do it. They know how to open their door to the community and let us in. They know what the community issues are, and they know how to extend an olive branch when necessary or tell you to get out when necessary. But they know. And I have great fear that you are hiring a police chief, perhaps from outside of this community, when right down the hall from you, right down that little set of tables, you have some, or if not, the 3 best police officers in senior leadership positions in this country. And I think it would be a horrendous loss to this community to bring somebody in from outside and lose what we have. So I want to say that because I'm also aware there are a number of police departments across this country that are hiring police chiefs. And I want the message to these 2 men to be, we get it. We stand with you. We know what you have. And we know that you are going to be an amazing leader in this community. Because as I say, I think it will be a tremendous loss to lose that talent. Everywhere I go, people say to me, yeah, but you're in London, Megan. You've got a great police chief. You've got great deputy chiefs. We don't have that here. Our police department would never let us in the door. So I'm just asking you to pay attention to that, because those 3 men are your greatest assets. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Megan Walker, and to your team as well. It's always appreciated, and you're always welcome here. Thank you very much. So that concludes our meeting. Thank you very much.
Any other public comments?
Oh, and my apologies, before I conclude, I just want to make sure if there's any other members of the public wishing to speak. I know we always ask Rick at the end. Anyone going once, going twice? Nothing from Rick, we're good? All right, thank you very much.